maybe not these because they're camel.
All right, we should be good.
Julian, is it okay if we turn this light off so we can see?
Yeah.
That's better.
Yep.
It's okay.
Usually the lights.
Okay, I'm now stopping my video, so I go away and I give the floor to you all.
Yay, thank you.
Okay, well, I want to thank Sarah for inviting me tonight. I had never been to Trimble County and I'm learning so much. I had never heard of an equity barn. So I've had a little history and I have never heard of Pawpaw ice cream. I hope to make it back when that is available. And we've just been having a lovely chat while people come in about Asian giant hornets, which are not in Kentucky, but we do have the Washington Department of Ag has sent state apiarists a specimen so that we can educate people about this new invasive, which at this point in time is just in Washington state. And so I like to bring it to different talks because I think we hear a lot about this, but we never really have something to look at. And there's no reason to be scared of this at this point in time, especially here in Kentucky. I tell people I'm more afraid of ticks, and because they can give me Lyme disease and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which can definitely kill me. And so I'm more afraid of our the ticks that we have in our state as opposed to this Asian giant hornet. But it does help to see that it really is the world's largest insect and that there is concern. And that I do, as part of the state apiarist, take samples so that we can be assured that it's not in our state. So, I consider that part of the state apiarist position, just knowing that it's not here and being able to say with some confidence that it's not here. I have been asked to talk tonight about flower power because I'm the state apiarist. Some people don't realize that our state has an apiarist. My primary role is to do inspections of commercial beekeepers. And so beginning in March all the way until the first week of November, I am, half the time on the road. I'm working with commercial beekeepers who are moving their hives between states, or I'm taking samples among all types of beekeepers, hobbyists, sideliners, commercial beekeepers, so that we can get some health data and keep and maintain these baselines for health data of our beekeepers in the state. And then education and economic opportunities, making contacts between beekeepers and restaurant owners, or beekeepers and farmers markets, that kind of thing. That also falls under my hat too. So, April is kind of an unusual time because, the weather can be very unpredictable. And I can typically be anywhere in the state, doing 3 or 4 different things, but I'm really pleased to be here tonight and just appreciate you all coming out because I know it's kind of yucky outside. When we talk about pollinator habitat, that's become a very popular thing for people to want to do. And this is for good reason. Every single managed beehive needs approximately, it's approximately 5.5 million flowers to get through a full calendar year. And that takes a lot of resources. And so this particular image that we have up here is the devil's walking stick. This may not be something that you're familiar with because it tends to be in the forest, kind of in the understory part. It's not very showy, but when it does bloom, it attracts pollinators from all of. And so when you're driving down the interstate, you may see this, and it will be in August. And so, like I said, it tends to kind of be a forgotten plant, but Kentucky has quite a bit of devil's walking stick. You do not want to hold the stem because it has thorns, similar to, say, a honey locust, serious thorns. But its flowers are very showy. And it's, like I said, it's kind of a nice thing to have because in August you can have droughts, and all types of pollinators. Bumbles will work this, honeybees will work this, you know, your native bees will work it. Now, I am trying to move this forward, but it is not moving forward.
Aim it this way.
I'm gonna move over here first, yeah. And I know that we have 2 beekeepers here. Are you 3? Do you have hives at all? Okay, so I like to compare, you know, I like to compare the nutrition that a hive needs to the same kind of nutrition that we need, and you know, the energy that we take to go shopping for it, right? And I think many of us remember when COVID first hit. You know, maybe in your lifetime, it was the first time you showed up at a grocery and there were empty shelves. It was certainly a wake-up call for me to go to my local grocery store and there not be a single onion of any type, you know. Now, I ended up substituting leeks for onions, but that was a new thing for me. And it's the same with honeybees. You know, when they fly out, the forager field is going out, they are shopping. And they are shopping for proteins and they are shopping for carbohydrates. They're shopping for water. You know, in some cases, they build an antibacterial envelope inside their hive that we call propolis. It's sticky and it kind of acts like insulation. And so if you've ever had a Christmas tree and that rosin that kind of surrounds the outside of the Christmas tree, bees will use that sticky substance. They will bring it back to their hive and they will use it to kind of plug up holes, you know, so that cold wind can't come inside their hive, and or insects like ants and other types of things can come inside their hive. So when a forager bee is going out of the hive, they are going on shopping trips and they are picking up, they're very opportunistic. They're picking up these different items and they're bringing them back to the hive because as a collective unit, they need all of those things if they as a hive are going to survive, not just through the summertime, but also in the wintertime. So the first thing that they are looking for this time of year is pollen. And you may see, if you look very closely with bumbles and honeybees, their very back legs may be having, you can see little yellow pellets of dandelion pollen or clovers or, you know, some other types of things that may be blooming. And that is absolutely critical. When those first pellets of pollen come into the hive, that's the trigger for the queen. And she says, okay, there's enough protein in the environment, I can go ahead and start laying eggs. She will not lay eggs if there's no pollen coming in. So that's our first, you know, that's one of the first things, like if we were to have a shopping list, that would be at the top of the list. And they need, oh my goodness, I was going to say, what have I done? They need approximately 33 pounds of pollen to get through a full calendar year. The other thing that they need, and especially especially this time of year when they go through what I call stress tests, you know, we'll have 70 degrees on one day and then it'll be 25 degrees the next day. You know, they need carbohydrates because they are in essence jogging in place. You know, and if you think about you, if you were going to jog in place through the wintertime, you would need sugar, you would need nectar. And so the plants have developed these strategies to produce nectar, and that's their lure, right? Plants are like us, they want to reproduce, but they are rooted to the ground. So they have developed these strategies to look attractive and smell attractive. You know, those of you who have ever grown lavender, you know, or mint or basil or these flowering plants, you know that these strategies are things that a plant will do to attract a pollinator to it. You know, so they have, because they're rooted, right? They can't go to the ball game, they can't go to the bar, they can't meet at a movie cinema. So they have to really work to lure pollinators to them. You know, petal structure is another thing that has evolved to attract pollinators to it. So you've got a couple of different things. You have scent, you have color, you have petal structure, but all of that is really about luring pollinators to come and get the nectar, right? And while they are slurping up the nectar, then they are picking up the pollen. And that will allow, you know, the bee is so hairy that the pollen will stick to it. And as it goes to another flower, that's how the plant's genomes can be spread around. So back to our grocery list here. Pollen, every hive needs approximately 33. Sometimes we'll go ahead and up and increase that to like say 53, especially if it's a hive in the northern latitudes like Canada, where they have to get through a longer period of winter time. Nectar, especially, we call that the fuel of the hive. If it runs out of this fuel, the hive will die. It's kind of like your car. When it runs out of gasoline, it just stops, it doesn't go. They need that nectar, like I said, because right now they're jogging in place. They're not flying today. You know, they're all inside, they're clustering, they're staying warm, they're jogging in place until it's warm enough for them to get outside. But they need that nectar to give them energy. And a typical frame needs 120 pounds. You know, so if you break that down into, you know, 2 seasons a year, you know, spring and summer, they'll need 60 pounds of nectar that becomes honey. And then fall and winter, they'll need 60 pounds. And then water is essential for a hive. I think beekeepers kind of tend to forget this. They need as much water in the winter as they do in the summertime. Some of that is so that the honey that has been collected, they can reliquefy it and go ahead and consume it. And in the wintertime, in the summertime, they use water to air condition their hives. When it gets super hot outside, they'll thermoregulate. They'll keep that hive at say 93 degrees consistently, even if it's 110 outside, but they have to have water. And if they don't have water, they can get into an emergency situation pretty quickly. And I think because we have beekeepers here, I'd like to give you a couple of little pointers. One of the things that we have noticed, researchers have noticed, when it comes to shopping for water, when the foragers are out, they love muddy old cow ponds. And so the thinking among the researchers is that they are getting minerals from those cow ponds, especially sodium. And they need sodium all year long. So one thing that you can do is to add a salt block near your apiary that has no additives to it, right? Just simply salt, you know, nothing to kind of, you know, no, like I said, no coloring, nothing like that, just simply salt. You'll see bees on it, you know, all year long. They need it. Okay, so that's our shopping list. And like I said, just like we discovered in COVID, you know, they may find that there's something on their list that they can just make a substitute for, which is what we did, right? I mean, okay, so they didn't have potatoes, so we just switched our menu to corn, right? And we can do that for short amounts of time. You know, we can make these substitutions, but anytime we make a substitution like that, we know that there are critical elements, right? Minerals maybe that we're not getting as much of as we should. And it's the same with our pollinators too. So dandelions are one of those things where we just beg people not to spray and not to mow and things like that. It's not because it's a great plant. It's an absolutely it's a mediocre plant when it comes to pollen quality. However, it beats not having any pollen whatsoever, you know? So, you know, that's why we tend to defend dandelion. It's not that I think any of us are especially partial to it. We would like for there to be more plants, but it's the one thing that we know is a fairly reliable bloomer at a time when other things aren't. From a plant's perspective, pollen takes a lot of energy to produce, right? And so some plants will produce very few grains of pollen. I'm thinking of sourwood, for instance. You know, it produces like maybe 3 or 4 grains of pollen, not like, say, you know, I'm thinking of, you know, the ragweed, which just produces copious amounts of pollen, you know, more than what any of us want. It's a very intensive process for a plant to invest in producing pollen. A flowering plant, I should specify, right? A flowering plant, if it's going to make pollen, it's you know, putting in DNA, protein, fat, starches, vitamins, you know, and it's the fingerprint of a flowering plant, right? You know, this pollen grain is unique to the asters, right? This other pollen grain may be unique to the maples, right? So when you see these structures, you know, they have evolved to adhere to the hair on the bodies of the bees, right? I mean, they're sticky. They are, you know, they are going to want to be held. Nonetheless, as a bee is flying, you know, some pollen grains can blow off in the wind. But one of the things that really marks pollen grains in their evolutionary time period is that once you see flowering plants begin to have pollens, you know, those grains have developed so that they adhere to the body of the bee.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do the bees get it only from flowering plants? Like do they get it from the aster or like corn?
So they can, you know, bees have all of this hair. I mean, you know, that to me is the most amazing thing to see a bee under a microscope is to see, I mean, even the eyeballs of a bee will have hair, you know, and that produces an electromagnetism while they're flying. So they can pick up other types of pollen from plants that aren't necessarily flowering plants, because honeybees especially are opportunists that way. That's what that hair is for. It functions as a magnet, you know, because they need all of that pollen that they can get, you know, to provide food to the brood, to the young back in their hives.
And then the payload that they bring in on their back legs, is that nectar?
No, that's the pollen. That's the
okay.
protein. Yeah. So the nectar that they're picking up, you know, the tongue of a honeybee is called a Swiss Army knife. You know, it unfolds, you know, in order to slurp up the nectar in a plant. And nectar, of course, is 80% water. It's not honey at that point in time. So it's fluid enough that the bees can slurp it up. And they hold it in a crop, right? Bees have 2 stomachs, right? And so we call that crop a nectar crop. And that's separate from its stomach. So in part, you'll get some 7th grader who'll say, oh, honey's just bee poop. You know, I mean, they love that. And you got to say, no. There's a stopper between that honey crop and the true stomach, you know, so that nectar never reaches the digestive system of the bee. Bees have 3 parts, right? I mean, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, but that crop sits right on top of that abdomen so that it never hits the digestive system. And in the process, enzymes are added in the system, the circulatory system of the bee, and the dehydration of the nectar, so that it gets down to approximately 16 to 18% moisture, and then you've got your honey. But no, I mean, they can pick up pollens from other plants besides the flowers. You know, you'll see all kinds of pollens. You know, one of my family farms backs up to UK's research farm, and I get my honey analyzed every year. And I think it was 2018, 2019, my honey analysis had 2 grains of hemp in it, but it reads cannabis. Well, you know,
That's some good honey.
there you are.
Price goes up.
Exactly. There you are. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So this is, you know, that pollen gets brought back. Bees cannot process the pollen while they're on the flower, right? Their digestive system cannot do that. Bumbles can. Bumblebees can sit on that flower and if necessary, they can eat the pollen straight from the flower, but not honeybees. They have to bring it back and then begin to process it so that it will not spoil inside the hive, right? So they make this, they take the pollen itself as the raw material and they add honey to it and they add other enzymes to it and they make a substance that we call bee bread. And it's from this bee bread that they will make the food, the royal jelly that gets fed to the young. And it's super packed protein, right? It's really super packed protein. All right, let's move forward. I'm talking about the brood here. You know, this is what, you know, an egg looks like. You know, a queen has an ovipositor that lets her drop an egg, one egg per cell directly in the center of a cell. And her nurse bees, which are the youngest caste of the hive, will immediately get to work converting the pollen into royal jelly, you know, to feed the eggs. And this is a brood frame. You know, each one of these cells here, underneath that wax capping, is a developing young pupae. A young bee will emerge from that. And these are the nurse bees keeping it warm, right? This is their job. As nurse bees, they come out of the hive and immediately are put to work, you know, covering this brood. It's like a baby. You don't want it to get too hot. You don't want it to get too cold, right? And so they need to have their food resources close to them so that they can convert it into brood food. And they're using everything about their community here to keep the brood warm and healthy. Okay, let's move forward. So many of us, you know, we're so accustomed to thinking about honeybees producing honey that we never really think about a nectary on a bud. Now, this particular plant is a partridge pea. And partridge peas are kind of unusual because their nectaries can be on the branch itself, on the stem, whereas most of our nectaries are inside the flower, right? But nectaries on cotton is like this, where the nectaries will be on the branches, and like obviously partridge pea is. And if we move forward to the next slide, what we will see is that I hope that this, what I'm about to push here, is a pointer. Well, it's not a pointer. So what we see here is the proboscis. It's the tongue of the bee, and it's unfolded to gather the nectar that the nectary is producing. And plants have different times for a nectary to produce nectar. So for instance, buckwheat produces nectar in the morning. Sunflowers produce nectar in the afternoon. You know, so when you're doing your plantings, you want to think about having a variety of plants, you know, and that way your bees will have plenty of options. And let's move to the next slide, because I think this next slide then shows you, you know, a nectary exuding this watery substance here. And this is why, you know, when I'm talking to gardening groups, you know, I ask that that if you're going to apply any type of herbicides, wait until after, you know, wait until like after 5 o'clock when the field force has gone home. And then that way you're not contaminating this, because many people don't know when the nectaries of their flowers are blooming. You know, so this is not, you know, you want this to be as pure as possible for your bees, because they will take everything back home. And they don't know that you have scheduled Mosquito Joe to come by
Exactly.
at 2 p.m. They're just going to slurp that because that's what they do, you know. And it's very easy for plants to produce this. You know, in other words, it's very intensive for a plant to produce pollen. It is very easy for plants to produce nectar. They produce nectar the livelong day. Going back to what we were saying, plants use nectar as a lure. They use it as a bait because all they need is for the sun to shine a couple of hours and they can produce sugar, and they will. You know, so, all right, let's move forward. So when bees bring back that nectar that we were just looking at, it looks like this. And at this point, it's still 80% water. And at this point, this can still ferment because it is water, right? So the bees still have some work to do. They have to dehydrate this. And once they dehydrate it, then they can cap it over with the wax capping. But that dries it out, right? They pull out all of that moisture and get that moisture level down to like say 16, 17%, cap it, and then it's ready to stay good for thousands of years, right? And this is the queen, and she is surrounded by her workers here. I didn't realize that when I first put the picture in, and I thought, oh, well, that may be interesting for some folks. And so when those cells are dehydrated and they're capped over, this is when we have our honey, right? And then it's safe for us to eat, right? Then we can take a spoon and slurp on it ourselves. So, you know, our topic tonight is called flower power because we want to talk about ways of improving forage and that they, you know, I'm never sure of the audience if they have access to land or if they just have a back porch where they can keep containers. Both are really good. But if you do have some land or like maybe an acre or so, you know, to me, what tends to get forgotten if you're doing any type of improvement is to start first with your cooperative extension agent and that office and have a soil test done and know what you have. In other words, I think a lot of people just get really excited and they buy a lot of flower seed and they don't consider, you know, any type of modifications to their land that they may need to take. You know, I see this quite a bit. You know, some people will want to try to plant flower seed on a field of clay. Well, that's frustrating. One, it's an enormous waste of time for another, and it's an enormous waste of money because flower seed is exponentially more expensive than grass. So start with and most of your soil tests are like $10, $15, you know, so it's not an enormous expense. And then you've got some sense of what will grow really well. Clovers especially have a tendency to be sensitive to different soil types. For instance, in northern Indiana, you know, Alsike clover does really well, but it does not do so well here in Kentucky. You know, crimson clovers have different soil requirements than say your white clover. So it just helps to do some background work. It's not unusual to take a good year and a half, you know, to do your proper soil, you know, soil plan, if you will. Most successful forage projects factor in a 3 to 4 season kill with herbicide because grasses are so competitive that you really need to get those weeds that are in the seed bank underneath the grasses. So in our area, in the bluegrass, which is Lexington, where I am, your first kill of this process would be like the first week of August, you know, and then your second kill would be right before the first killing frost, so about middle of October. And then your third kill would be in March, you know, when all of those weeds that have just been waiting for everything that's been growing on top of them to die off really comes out to play. That's when you want your third kill. And many seed companies prefer a fourth kill Because again, it's about making sure that that seed bank isn't harboring Johnson grass, which will be your perennial enemy. You know, Johnson grass, it will survive anything. So you want to make sure to kill that Johnson grass, you know, before you spend a lot of money on your flower seeds. So reach out to your farm services agency or your NRCS agency, work closely with them. NRCS is just fabulous for, you know, loaning, you know, your tillers that are set at the right. I think sometimes a lot of us who have grown up on tobacco farms think that you need to set your tiller really deep. Well, wildflower seeds, goldenrod especially, doesn't like that at all. You know, and so you can have a poor germination rate because you set your tiller so deeply that your flower seed just won't germinate. And so work with your local folks here. They know what will work here. Your farm services agency and your NRCS can also help include you in federal programs where sometimes there can be a 50-50 match. And so in our Fayette farm, for instance, our flower seed invoice was $13,000. Wow. You know, because we had a good sized plot, and so our portion was only like 7,500. But I will tell you this: I don't know if you remember, in September of 2018, we didn't have a single drop of rain in the bluegrass, not one drop of rain, and that paid for it. Us. I mean, we did not have a single hive that ran out of honey that year because our flowers handled that. They picked up, they were producing nectar throughout that drought. So it's paid for itself. It's paid for itself ever since we established it in 2015. But that year in particular was crucial. We would have lost the shirts off our back if we hadn't had that. And so they have the USDA has simplified its website, believe it or not. Yay. You know, farmers.gov. You know, I mean, it's just taken I don't know how many years, but it is easier to find that information. So, all right, let's move ahead. And the NRCS, slightly different because the Farm Services Agency works with farmers and they're pulling land that has been used for agricultural purposes and putting that into pollinator habitat. NRCS works with that marginal land, you know, the wetlands, the areas that you can't plant anything in, a crop in. Similar effort here to get habitat established, similar set of funds. And they're just awesome to work. Like if you wanted to do a prescribed burn, for instance, say you have just something against using herbicides, drip line torches, they will let you borrow that in some cases. You know, it changes by the region, of course. But like I used to work with distilleries, and they cannot do a prescribed burn. Right. You know, I mean, like that's just an insurance adjuster's nightmare. And so herbicides are their primary tool. But, you know, for other people, you know, such as myself, I mean, we can do prescribed fire burns. And the NRS people are just wonderful. So, all right, let's move ahead. Now, I talked about, you know, what a 3-season kill looks like. And this is just sort of it's a cheat sheet, shall we say, if you are interested in this. Now, this entire presentation is on the computer here, so that if you wanted it, you could access it again. But, you know, a 1 quart thing of glyphosate mixed with 15 gallons of water, it's going to cost you about $5. And it's going to give you enough for 3 springs on a 3-acre patch. And that's pretty reasonable on the pocket, you know, and it gets you out of some of the problems that come with prescribed fire burns, you know. So, and I just want to say here, I'm not endorsing, you know, I know people have very strong feelings about herbicides, but if this is something you're serious about and prescribed burns are not an option, this can be a workaround. So let's move on. And this is what it's going to look like for, you know, I think this particular farm, this was like the second kill. Let's move next to the prescribed fire. We're talking about the advantages here. Prescribed fire burns typically are cheaper. They're certainly quicker. You know, it's a one-day thing, you know. You do have to do some effective ground preparations. You've got to give your burn breaks in place. And I'll show you what that means here in a second. But property owners in Kentucky you do have a right to do a prescribed fire burn on your land, especially if you're working with your local fire department. Other states differ from that, where you would need to have training to do a prescribed fire burn. They just don't want anyone out there, you know, with the drip line torch, you know, as you can imagine. Wayne Paley's How to Manage Small Prairie Fires is still a good go-to resource for this kind of skill. But let's move ahead. This is what I mean by a burn break. You know, you want something here to kind of stop that action. You know, it'll hit these cool season grasses and not jump that. Typically, like I said, as long as you're not in the middle of a drought. Let's move ahead. Here's NRCS, right? And they're doing a prescribed fire burn of one of their pollinator habitat plots. And they've got it going here so that fire meets these cool season grasses, and that will be enough to stop it. It's not going to jump this break and hit those trees, for instance. Let's move on. Just another prescribed fire burn that the NRCS is doing, because if you do, like, say 3 acres, you're going to have a couple of perennial problems. You'll have Johnson grass. You'll have woody vegetation that'll want to take it over. You'll have multifloral rose and blackberry bushes. So you know, those are your perennial problem children that you'll have to control. And that's why prescribed fire burns are so great, is that you can kind of deal with that immediately. Let's move on. This is one that's on my family farm, where a road is a burn break, right? A gravel road is a burn break. Cool season grass is up here, and the pond is right here. You know, so it's not going anywhere, you know, when we burn that particular area. And then the next slide shows you what it looks like. You know, I mean, when you burn all of that, those competitive vegetations off of the seed bank, then your wildflowers really have a chance to explode. And so there you have your bee balm and your purple cornflowers and your
Did they come up naturally, or did you put seed out?
So we first seeded this in 2015, and that has come up. We haven't reseeded it since then. Now it is due for another seeding, like it's due for another prescribed fire burn, for that matter. Yeah. But you will at some point have to seed it again, and it's due. It's time for it. I think this is actually, that picture was taken in 2018, you know, but it came back like that, like 5 months later. So it pays for itself, is the point. You know, that 7,500 to me, you know, my first love was 1930s Great Depression era, you know, policies, you know, the CRP and the NRCS pollinator habitat. To me, like, that's our government's best investment in land since the 1930s, state parks and you know, WPA, easily. But you're right, it does need maintaining. It will at some point, like for instance, I don't have a picture of it here but New England asters are a fall flower, and they can tend to outcompete your other fall flowers, you know. And so we have one field that the New England asters has pretty much taken over, you know, and we have to seed that one. We'll try to get that one done this year. All right, let's move forward. So we started talking about how flowers have evolved strategies to lure pollinators to them, right? Because they're rooted, right? And they can't go anywhere. So they have to use a unique combination of floral structure, coloration, scent, right? Perfume, and nectar, right? Nectar being the bait. And they also appeal to, bees see with a different spectrum of light than you and I see with, so they are seeing colors through UV, ultraviolet lenses on their eyes. And so whereas you and I may see this as a monochromatic color, they see the same flower with the floral nectar guides helping the bees find where the nectar is, right? And so with their different vision, right, they know exactly where to go. And once all the nectar has been taken from this flower will lose its petals, it will quit advertising. In other words, because it's so inefficient, it's just like the gas station that turns its neon lights off at midnight, just so that people don't keep stopping at 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., right? Once it has achieved some type of success in luring a pollinator to it, and there's active transmission of its pollen, then its job is done. And so it can begin, then it will drop its flowers, it will lose its scent, and we're already seeing this, I think, in some of our pear trees. Let's move on. One of Craig Burrows, those of you who maybe have a subscription to National Geographic, you may have seen his work. He takes pictures of these flowers using ultraviolet induced visible fluorescence, where you're seeing the flower as the pollinator sees the flower, right? So this is just a plain coreopsis, right? Which I have 2 or 3 different types of coreopsis in my flower garden. And so you can see from what his work is just, all of this, this structure here, this petal structure, all of these are floral nectar guides leading the bees and other pollinators to where the nectar is. Let's move on. And, what I did with my 3rd book, Flower Power, was Dr. Jen O'Keefe, who teaches at Morehead State University. She is able to recognize pollen grains in honey. So I included a lot of her pollen grain photography in that book so that people could see how the pollen grains have changed. A lot of wind-blown pollens are perfectly round because all they need is for the wind to blow them, right? But flower pollen grains have these crevices, right? These divots, right? That help them adhere to the body of the bee, and they're sticky. If you've ever felt pollen grains, they have a stickiness to them. So let's move on. Willows, my pussy willow is right now putting out willow. The male plants have a brighter yellow than the female plants because, again, they've got to pull those pollinators to them. Of course, willows, we call them dioecious, meaning 2 houses in Latin. So you have male plants and you have female plants, and the male pollen, the male plants produce a brighter yellow pollen than the female plants. And then some of your plants are monoecious, right? They're 1 house. They have both your male and your female parts on that. But willows are unusual in that regard, and they get the season started, every year. They just kick off the queens. That willow pollen starts coming into those hives, and those queens immediately start laying. All right, let's move on. Red maples are another reliable favorite for our bees, although maples don't depend upon pollinators in quite the same way that willows do, right? But still, if you look at the maple pollen, you know, it has evolved to be able to adhere to the bodies of bees. Our red maple kind of suffered during this last snow snap. So let's move on to the next. And we're moving through the seasons with these plants here. We'll go through pretty quickly through it. But of course, crab apples are a good, you know, we were talking earlier before you came in that Trimble County has a lot of orchards, right? And especially apples and peach, they absolutely have to have bee pollination. And so, you know, one of the things that I like to remind people, of course, in our orchard in Fayette County, we have to apply chemicals to a fungicide to our apples. Kentucky Department of Ag does have an electronic app so that you can alert your beekeepers within a 5-mile area if you're going to be applying something that the label of the product says you need to communicate with beekeepers. This app is free. It is anonymous. In other words, if you plug in your spray date, your area beekeepers will get a 48-hour notice, but they can't tell who's doing the application. So you won't have angry people knocking on your door. But you, as the applicator, can also receive an email that gives you proof that you tried to communicate with your neighbors. And this will help you be compliant with label laws. So like I said, it typically is 5 minutes to set up. It's not a huge amount of time to set up your account. And I am registered as both a beekeeper and an applicator because obviously we have 200 hives, but we have an orchard, you know, and we do have neighbors. And so this is something that you can register a couple of different ways.
What does the beekeeper do if their neighbor's gonna spray?
It depends. So when I got notification, we had this huge fall armyworm outbreak last year. I don't know if it hit your county like it hit Fayette County, but the horse farms were really alarmed at the fall armyworm damage, which was basically causing their horse farms to turn brown.
Right.
So they've contracted with southern states to do chemical applications. I got my notice. What I did was I picked up my phone. I looked at the weather 48 hours from then. It wasn't any big deal. I think it may have been overcast that day. I didn't think my bees were going to be flying. I wasn't too worried about it. Now if it had been sunny and 85, I may have been a little bit more worried about it, but 5 miles is a huge amount of time or amount of space. And Kentucky Department of Ag doesn't want to be in a position of telling beekeepers what to do with their hives. We just want you to get the information.
You can't tell the bees not to fly.
You could do, if you were really worried about it, you could wet sheets
Cover them up.
and just cover them up, but make sure that you wet your sheets, so that they don't, get too hot. Depending on, again, it's going to depend upon the weather. But we want beekeepers to get notification.
Yeah.
That's what the app is for. And that's our orchard. We can move on. Ornamental pears, everybody gets mad at these Bradford pears, I do too. But I mean, it is the point of this photo is showing you what he's using, how a bee sees the ornamental pear blossoms, because they do bring in nectar from those ornamental pears. I realize that they're a trash tree, but nonetheless.
He's like,
Black locust, oh yeah, they do. And black locust especially is a legume. Bees love to work bees. I think the next slide is showing you, just the pollen that they bring in addition to the nectar, which of course is water white. I mean, it's just a wonderful legume to have in your system. Improves the soil. Tulip poplar, our state tree. very visible nectar guides here, helping the pollinators find where the pollen is and the nectar is. And then I think the next slide, hollies, we forget about hollies, but hollies are blooming in May, a time of year. They're so small, I think we completely forget about them. But look at the pollen grains. And there are like 30 different types of hollies, you know. I mean, this is a really overlooked honey plant in Kentucky, in my opinion. I've got, you know, my husband wants to chop down our holly tree all the time, and I won't let him because of that. That is our holly tree. You know, let's move on. Wild cherries, another one that the bees like to work, although they do, you know, because of the horse farms and the bluegrass, they can pose a hazard to horses because they do attract those bagworms, which cause horses sometimes to miscarry. But I love wild cherries. I'm thrilled when they bloom on our farm. Flowering dogwood is one of those which will come in. It will be important about 1 in every 5 years, you know, because you will have, you know, these strain like 2014, 2015, you know, we had Valentine's Day snowfall, and it kept snowing for the next 3 weeks after that. So the first spring plant that showed up in my honey analysis was flowering dogwood. I had never seen it before, and I see it every now and then since then. But that was the first year that I realized the importance of dogwood, because it was the only thing that was blooming. And roughleaf dogwood will extend that dogwood bloom in a really nice way. It's called roughleaf because the leaves kind of feel like a really soft sandpaper, but that bloom will last well into the first part of June, you know, after your flowering dogwood has gone out of bloom. So, and it's a great thing to have on the sides of streams and things. It's a good water mitigation tree. And Phacelia, we're moving now into wildflowers. Phacelia bees, just all kinds of bees love Phacelia. It's that lavender, like the lavender plants. That color does really well with the UV spectrum of honeybees' vision. So if you're looking for something, a good ground cover, Phacelia is it, and it blooms in May. A very reliable bloomer in May. And then our next sourwood, I talked about a little bit, because people love sourwood honey. It's very difficult to type sourwood honey because this plant doesn't produce a lot of pollen. But it's going to bloom. This is blooming in July. That's why it's such an important plant for the Appalachian region, is that it's blooming at a time when other plants are not, tree plants are not. And I found out the hard way that the best way to kind of promote the cultivation of sourwood is to collect this seed by hand, as opposed to trying to buy bare root seedlings of sourwood. It does not transplant well that way. Seed, it works much better that way. And then and the last couple of the slides are some more from Craig Barrow's. Mexican sunflower is a very reliable plant, very bright, easy to grow, can handle a lot of drought, like the plains coreopsis, kind of take some tough conditions. So if you're looking to kind of brighten up a spot in your yard or maybe in a pot, Mexican sunflower is a good choice. Yellow clover can quickly outcompete any of your other wildflowers, so be very cautious if you're going to introduce this into your yard. But again, I like to just kind of point out, you know, these divots, you know, the way that the pollen here it looks completely different than, say, asters. Let's move to our bee balm, Monarda. You know, it has another fundamentally different structure. So the wildflower pollens look different than your tree pollens, is the point here. And then purple coneflower is even crazier. I mean, it looks like some kind of medieval weapon, you know? But when you see the flower and you see bumbles on it too, you see why it's effective, right? And then the Shasta daisy, you know, each one of these, you know, is sending up an advertisement, you know, these nectar guides, these petals acting as nectar guides are sending up advertisements, helping those pollinators find exactly where the pollen and nectar are. New England asters, same thing. Now, remember that yard I told you where our asters have begun now to outcompete the purple cone flowers and the goldenrod and things like that? They are in there, but that yard in particular needs a good burn down. You know, it's overdue.
So having flowers that close to the hives, it doesn't encourage robbing from the hives? No?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No. Typically, it reduces it, right? I mean, because they have so many, they have jobs, they're trying to go out there and collect, they're trying to shop.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if I had a big pot of sugar water that close
Right.
to the hives, then I've got a rob, then it's a robbing situation. But as long as they're flowers, they'll be okay. And this is our NRCS plot on our Estill County farm. And this is all goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, purple ironweed. I mean, this is just bonkers. But, and you know, we don't think of Joe Pye weed. And, you know, when we're driving down the interstate, we don't think about sumac, which will be blooming in June, right? Very important. All of my honey analyses end up showing sumac, you know, every single one of them. Yeah, very reliable. And then, of course, our beloved goldenrod is the one wildflower. Jeff Pettis has gone through the herbarium back to the 18th century here in the United States. And the one wildflower whose pollen maintains its value throughout all of that age is goldenrod. You know, like a bee could land on that dry, dusty goldenrod on a page and still have value in that pollen. It does not diminish with time, right? Goldenrod it holds on to its value. All right. And so we're closing out now. And this is just a reminder that flowering plants are not static. In other words, you know, they understand that there is climate change happening. And so they are changing their strategies, even as we may remain oblivious to that. They're blooming earlier. You know, sometimes they have better quality pollen. Sometimes their quality of pollen changes. Sometimes they're changing their color striations. You know, they are responding to the changes that are going on. They have to, right? I mean, their evolutionary success depends upon that. And so this is a really good little article about some of the flowers that are changing their strategies. I thought if you found this interesting, you would want to know what some of the scientists are learning, but especially the bloom patterns. You know, with some of the warmer climates, like for instance, on Christmas Day, I think it was 75 in Lexington. You know, I mean, flowers are responding to those kinds of things. You know, they are not just waiting, you know, on the sidelines thinking, well, we'll just wait this one out. You know, we'll wait till Congress acts on this. You know, I mean, they have to make some changes to that. And that in turn will impact bees. You know, that impacts whether I get in and make sure that they have honey, or, you know, it just changes how I need to manage my hives. So, all right. So I think that brings us up to, I like to you know, give credit to the people who helped with those pollen slides that you were seeing. That's Jen O'Keefe at Morehead State, and Dr. Von Bryant died last year at Texas A&M. But he was certainly a leader in doing honey analysis by pollen typing. Let's move on to the next slide, and that's my contact information.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so
You
much.
got any questions?
And you said this presentation is going to be on your website.
Yeah, so I can send you a copy.
That would be awesome. You do.
We just sit in a jar and we get the analysis.
So Texas A&M has closed the honey typing lab at, once Dr. Bryant died in January of last year. I don't know if Dr. O'Keefe is accepting samples yet. BCTC in Lexington, that's Bluegrass Community Tech College, had explored the option of doing honey analysis. And I think that the person who had been the lead on that has retired. Her successor is retiring in May. The third person wants to do this. I'm not sure yet how that's going to go. That's in transition. The Paleo lab in Colorado accepts samples for $200 a sample. But that's, and Sweetwater lab in Missouri, I think also does analysis. I don't know if they do pollen typing, but they do honey analysis.
There's not that many.
No, I think like maybe 5, and what was really sad about Dr. Bryant was lab closing was that he really had priced it to a point where the average beekeeper would want to have the honey analyzed. But like the Paleo lab, they're not using students. So they have to hire trained professionals, which costs money, so anyway. But
Great information. Thank you
Yeah,
so
you said you had
much.
200 hives.
Doug has
Do you
to
grow bees or do you produce honey or both?
both.
Yeah.
And it's my husband's, I'm just the help.
Do you
But
ship
we have
them?
a lot of
I mean, do you send them to the
California,
No.
for almonds or Florida for
No.
oranges or?
I think we would lose our minds if he decided to go migratory. I mean, like I said, it's his business and I would support him, of course, but that's a different game.
It is a whole different. thing.
And you get into issues like, I serve on Project Apis M, and, our president of Project Apis M is Zach Browning. He had 5,000 hives stolen this January. That's a lot of
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
Well, the logistics right
That's
now
not
is
coming back.
insane.
Yeah. And insurers don't know what to do with that. It's not like you can get insurance on theft for 5,000 hives.
Right.
And anytime, there was this case in 2020 where you had a couple of teenagers, just meanness, go out in the Iowa cornfield and turned over a bunch of hives. Did you all see this?
Mhm.
So they get caught and they get hauled in front of the judge, who I thought very wisely, said, okay, you're going to do community service with this beekeeper. But still, whenever a hive, they did this right when the bombogenesis or the vortex, I forget what weather phenomena came down. But anyway, they turned over these hives and they froze right through the course of the night because it was January. And, when you lose a hive like that, it's like anything with agriculture. If you lose a mare, you've lost years, right?
Sure.
It's not like you can go to Home Depot
I
and
know.
just buy, 5,000 hives. I mean, you lose years of that. And so the judge in the case of the Iowa sentenced these 2 teenagers to work with that beekeeper to help him get his hives back up. And they had to help with honey harvest and bottling, which to me is a real punishment because I really like being out in the field. I do not like doing honey. That is punishment. But I thought, good for you. You make sure that these teenagers learn what they have done. That it's not
The
just
impact that had.
shooting a stop sign, for fun. Yeah, so it's migratory beekeeping is a whole fundamental different type of ball game. And it's not like we have a field crew. We don't, it's just the 2 of us,
It's a lot of work.
it is a lot of work, we enjoy it. It's what we do. We don't do Little League, we don't do ballet, we don't do, we do bees. But that's not something that we're in any way, shape, or form prepared to handle. We like each other.
Yeah, exactly. I like being married. That you have kids, do they help you with that? as
No,
well? Okay.
no, so
So
that's
it's just you two.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
On top of a full-time job.
Was.
There's a lot of hives.
Well, he was really good natured. He was a good sport. When we first started dating, he had never kept bees, ever, never been in a hive. And he asked me after I had the ring on my finger if he had to be a beekeeper to get married to me. And of course I lied. A bald-faced lie. Of course you don't have to be a beekeeper. Never gave me that silly idea. Yeah.
If you go to these guys, how do they
So you can order them, you can work with a local beekeeper to get a swarm, and get up and running that way. You can buy some, what we call nooks, which are five frame small. A package is a queen and some bees in this kind of a vented box. A nook is 5 frames of a queen, her daughters, brood, honey. And if you were to choose between the two, I would suggest that you go with a nook, if you can buy one from the local beekeeper, or a swarm. I would encourage you, if you don't know a whole lot, I would encourage you to stay away from packages, because a lot can go wrong out of your control.
We bought a package, our very first one, and it absconded within a week or two.
Oh, yeah.
It was gone.
And then
Just gone.
we've bought packages and they've been
And
okay,
they've been
but,
okay, but yeah.
but the nukes is where it's at.
Yeah, you have to have a lot of things go right with a package. And again, a lot of it's not in your control. So like if you have, say, a week of rain, those bees in the package may start dying before they can get out and forage. Whereas a nook, you've got 5 frames, you've got drawn beeswax, you've got younger bees coming out, you've got your queen and her daughters, so the daughters won't turn against her typically. So there's a lot of advantages. You'll pay more money for a nook. Typically, there's a smoother transition for you. The bees can survive in spite of you, is what I tell people.
It's a definite live and learn.
Yeah. And so here is my brochure, if you'd like to take it. And there's the Kentucky Department of Ag Honeybee website is in green on the back panel, if you'd like to follow up or if you have any more questions or anything.
We
I also like
had a
to-
request for showing the hornet again.
Oh, the hornet. Okay, so that is the Asian giant hornet, and it is the world's largest insect, and it has received the name murder hornet because it can and has on occasion caused fatalities in France. So it has a human health risk with it. But what we typically tend to have in the United States is a European hornet, and I'm going to show that too. And the European hornet looks different, especially in the abdomen section, the business end of the section where the stinger is. If you look closely, it has what I call a wet paint drip on that abdomen that is different. It makes it different. And if you see that black drip on the abdomen, not that you want to get that close, then you know that that's a European hornet. It has been in the States since the 1800s. It's naturalized. But compared to the Asian giant hornet, you see that those are just solid stripes on the abdomen. And that's one difference in addition to the size. I hope to never see an Asian giant hornet alive.
Do you
Yeah.
have any other questions, Julie?
None that I'm seeing right now. So, except for the hornet request, and that's about it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was lovely.